Hi, this is Jeremy Simon with 3D Universe. I wanted to take you through the assembly process for this new design. This is the Raptor hand from e-NABLE. And the idea here is we tried to make this a lot easier to assemble and easier to print. It's designed to be printable without supports. It does have some built-in supports that we'll have to remove here, but otherwise it prints without supports. And it assembles using these 3D printed snap pins instead of all the Chicago screws and other hardware that were used before. So hopefully this will be easier and quicker for you, but it does still take some work, so I wanted to take you through that and show you the whole process here. Alright, so here we have a finished print of the Raptor hand by e-NABLE. This one was done at 130% scale so that it could all fit on a single build plate. So I printed on glass with a little Aquanet hairspray. Makes it nice and easy to take off with just some kind of a scraper tool. I'm going to use a putty knife here. Easiest way I've found is actually to just give it a little knock with this is called a thwack, which is a 3D printed hammer that you can find on Thingiverse. And if you just give it a little tap with that, the parts pop right off. Everything that we need is laid out here. We've got some basic tools that we're going to need. What I would suggest is a Phillips head screwdriver for the tensioner screws. Needle nose pliers. I have a couple of different kinds here. Those are helpful in pulling the cords through and even tying some of the knots if you don't have the smallest fingers. Those can be helpful. We have a lighter for burning the ends of the cords so that you can get rid of any frayed ends. Makes it easier to run those through the channels. I have a little 3D printed hammer. This is called the Thwack, and you can find it on Thingiverse under that same name, Thwack. I find that to be a nice little hammer to use for pounding in the snap pins if you need a little extra something to get them in. And we have some wire cutters, useful for cutting the cords, to trim those, some scissors to cut the foam padding, and that should be about all the tools that we need. Then we have all of our 3D printed parts, and just so that you know what we are using here and the terminology, this is the gauntlet. That's the part that goes over the arm, and we have some support pieces on the bottom that we will remove there. The palm piece also has a couple of support walls underneath there that we will remove. And then we have this little dovetail joint that goes on the back of the gauntlet. There's two pins that come out of that piece there, and those two pins are supported by little bits of support that we will need to remove. Those three parts are the only parts that have support. The rest of these parts are all ready to use as is. So we have the tensioner module itself. This has a little dovetail joint and will slide onto the back of the gauntlet there. That piece is ready to use. Then we have the tensioner pins, which slide into the tensioner module, and then we can use screws to tighten those up as needed. We have two of these larger snap pins and two caps for the hinge joints on the gauntlet. Then we have all the parts for the hand. So as I already pointed out, this is the palm, and we have 5 of the proximal phalanges. The proximal phalanges are the same for the fingers and the thumb, so you've got 4 for the fingers and 1 for the thumb. Those are all the same. Then you have the fingers. If you followed our suggestions, you've got 3 different sizes fingers. There's small, medium, and large. So the small one, you have to sort of lay them side by side to see which is which, because it's not a big difference. The small one should, of course, go with the pinky. Then we suggest the long one go on the middle finger, and then you can put a medium one on the ring finger, the index finger, and the thumb. Then we have our snap pins. There's 5 of the smaller snap pins for connecting the fingers and the thumb portions together. Then you have 1 medium-sized snap pin, and that is to connect the thumb to the palm. And you have 2 longer snap pins, and those are going to go through the knuckle joints. One goes in from each side to secure the fingers in place. As far as hardware goes, all we need is some standard screws. We've got 5 of these longer screws for the tensioners. We're using, at 130% scale, we're using a size 4 by 3 1/4 inches. Whether or not that size will work for you depends on what scale you're printing, so you might have to get something a little larger or smaller, but you'll want something sort of on the longer side. Again, these are 3/4 inch. And then we have 3 smaller screws. You want something very short that's not pointed, and these are to go on the underside of the palm to attach the Velcro to the palm. So you want something that can fit tightly into those holes so that it's going to sort of bite into that plastic when you screw them in, but you don't want those screws to be pointing out the other side of the palm. So you want those to be pretty short. Then we have our cords. The black cords that you're seeing here are the flexible elastic cord. And then we have some non-flexible cord here. We've got 5 of each, and those are going to be run through the fingers, and that's what causes them to actuate. And we have some medical grade foam padding, which we will use to line the inside of the gauntlet and a little bit of the inside of the palm. And we have a couple of pieces of Velcro, which is, this is the double-sided variety, which we will use to put inside the palm and through the slots on the gauntlet, and that's how it secures to the person's arm and hand. I think that covers everything, so we are ready to go into the assembly process. Okay, so I usually start with the fingers, and so we're just going to take each one of these and put the proximal phalange together with the distal phalange and use one of these small snap pins to connect them. Now you'll notice on the finger that there's one side that's got a round hole and the other side that has a rectangular hole. It's that rectangular side that you want to put the snap pin into because that's where it snaps into place. So we're going to put it through from that side, and it should take a little bit of force but not much, and ideally it will snap in there as the name suggests, and then still rotate very easily. We're going to do that with each one of these 5 fingers. Notice when you put the fingers together that the proximal phalange has 2 different sides. There's one side that has a single piece and another side that has sort of a 2-pronged piece. It's that side that has the 2 prongs that goes next to the finger, and that's so that those line up with the 2 sides of that distal finger phalange. So make sure that you put those together the right way. Now I'm going to line up the fingers so that I can make sure I have the small one and the long one figured out. Which one is the small one? Okay, so we're going to assemble them in that way. So what we'll do next is take the palm and we'll do 2 fingers at a time. So we'll leave those aside. And I'm going to attach these 2 fingers using one of these long snap pins. Now you'll notice with these long snap pins that it's not straight across. It's not, this top part isn't exactly perpendicular to the pin. It's at a little bit of a slant. And if you look at the way the palm is, you'll see that it also is slanted a little bit out at each edge. So you'll want to align that pin such that the slant goes in the same direction as what's on the palm, and it goes in that way. So we'll take 2 fingers and put those in and hold those in place while we put in the snap pin in the proper direction. Now these knuckle snap pins tend to fit a little bit more tightly by design, so it might take a little wiggling to get them in there. And this is where I usually give it a couple of taps with the thwack here, just to help get that all the way in. Now, it's important to note that for this pin that goes through the knuckle blocks, it's not supposed to go all the way in so that it's flush. It's supposed to be sticking out just a little bit there on the end, and that's so that you have a piece that you can grab onto if you ever need to replace that for some reason, if you need to replace a finger and need to take that pin out. So don't expect that to go all the way so that it's flush. It does stick out just a little bit there. Now we'll do the other side, the other 2 fingers. Again, we're just going to stick them in there, hold them in place while we put this other snap pin in, checking to make sure that the slant goes in the same direction as the palm. Go. Same thing, sticks out just a little bit, but those are in there quite securely now, and as you can see, these fingers can move quite easily, quite nicely. Now we just have to add the thumb in there. And we're going to, again, we'll look for the rectangular side of the hole, and that's where we'll put the snap pin in from. I've found the thumb snap pin to be a little tighter than the others, so I do usually use a little bit of a hammering on this one as well. To do that, I like to put it on the edge of a table so that it's supported from underneath. And that one is supposed to go flush, so that goes all the way down so that it's inserted flush, and now that rotates nicely. Fingers are in place. Go ahead and clean off the supports from inside here. We've got these two pieces of support that can just be broken off, and then we'll do a little cleanup. As you'll see, that might not break off right at the bottom. One of them did, the other didn't. I use little wire cutters to snip that off as close as I can. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect. You want to get that as cleaned up as you can, but it doesn't need to be perfectly smooth because this inside of the hand is going to be covered by this Velcro enclosure, and so the person's hand won't be scraping against that. So it doesn't need to be perfect. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on the gauntlet here, breaking off these pieces of support. A little bit of cleanup here. Okay, as you can see, it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be because, again, on the gauntlet, this is going to be covered by the medical foam padding, which will make that impossible to feel on the skin. And the last piece that we have a little cleanup to do is this little dovetail joint, and it's just these little bitty pieces of support that are on the pins there, which you can really just break off with your hand, but we'll use little clippers here. There you go, just those two little bits, and that's it for the support cleanup. Now to proceed, we'll go ahead and connect the hand and the gauntlet together. Those fit together, and the hinges in this case go from the inside. So we'll flip this over. Again, you'll see the familiar rectangular type of opening there on the inside of the gauntlet, which is where the pins go in from. Now you'll notice that those snap pins come through and stick out the other side. That is because we now put one of these snap covers on, and that should fit pretty tightly. In fact, I sometimes, again, use the hammer on the edge of a table just to make sure that's on tightly. That looks good. And once that's on, wrist can rotate freely, but the snap pin holds the cover holds the snap pin in place. We'll repeat the same thing from the other side. Snap pin from the inside. Snap pin cover on the outside. And just give it a little pound. And there we have it. Now in this case, this wrist is moving a little bit tightly. I think that's going to loosen up with a little bit of work here. And just give it a little bit of working back and forth. But that movement should be pretty good now. So now we have our wrist attached. Fingers move nice and smoothly. That's what we want to see. There shouldn't be any resistance in the fingers at all. If by some chance the fingers don't move smoothly, you might have to take them and do some sanding on the inner edges there, but they should not require that. Now that we have the basic assembly done, let's put the rest of the gauntlet together. The tensioning module has smaller holes on one side and larger rectangular openings on the other side. Those rectangular openings point towards the front of the hand. So slide them in that way. And again, this should be a fairly snug fit. There we go, snaps right in there. And then we have our little dovetail plug for the back, which fits on just as it looks. And those two pins fit into the two holes on the back. Now, to secure that in place, there's a few different ways of doing it. You could use a little spot of glue on the inside here. You can also just do a little bit of a heat weld, which is probably a bit more of a secure way of doing it. So you can use a hot tool, like either some kind of a soldering iron that you have adjustable control on, or even just by heating up a nail or something like that. You can rub that along the seam here just to melt the plastic a little bit and hold this piece in place. So we're going to save that step for later. Now, at that point, the only thing left to put together would be putting the tensioner pins into the tensioner module here, but I'm not going to do that just yet because we want to run all the cords first. So next thing we're going to do is install the cords, and then we'll install the foam padding and the Velcro, and the final step that we'll do is to put all the tensioning pins together and tension it up. All right, now we're going to install our cords. I'm going to do the flexible cords first, and then we'll do the non-flexible cords. So we're going to start with these black ones. I'd recommend that you use a lighter to just burn the ends very briefly, because that'll get rid of the little frayed ends just real quickly like that, and then you can sort of use your fingers to smooth it down, and you'll have a nice flat end that's going to be easier to feed through those cable channels. So we're just going to do that with each of these. Well, now we're going to go ahead and run the flexible cords through here. So these go along the tops of the fingers. So we're going to tie them off to these little tie posts here. And they then feed through the finger, come out here on the top of the palm, and they're going to tie off to these other posts here on the back of the palm. So we're going to have two cords. The first two get tied off to this post here on the back of the palm. Then the next two fingers tie off to that second post there, and then the thumb has its own tie-off post. The best way that I've found to get these knots tied, and this is the trickiest part of the process, is getting the knots tied and getting the tension just right, but the easiest way I've found is to feed the flexible cords through from the rear of this little tie-off post. If you feed it in from the rear, and then once you get it in there, you can sort of use a twisting motion, which is going to get it to flip up through the other side. So the twisting is the key to get it to come up out of that other side, and then you can tie it off. I'd recommend a triple knot. So we're going to do over under, then under over, and then over under. I'm going to tie that knot really tightly, triple knot. Now I'm going to trim that off by clipping it pretty close. I'm only going to leave about 2 millimeters maybe after the knot, and I'm going to clip that cable. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed the other end of the cable through from the front, from that front channel. I'm going to feed it through, and that's so that once I pull it tight, it's going to pull that knot around and underneath this little tie-off bar. So I'm feeding it through from the outside, and all the way through to the channel that runs, and you'll see it's coming out here on the finger now. So now I want to lift it just a bit, pull it out, and again, when I pull this tight, that knot is going to turn around and it's going to feed through and snap underneath. And now that knot is nicely hidden, and it's in this direction so that it's not going to move any further. I'm now going to take this cord and feed it into the next segment, through that hole right there, and it's going to feed right through there. Oops. And it'll feed right out the other side. Now, when this finger is in an upright position, that hole connects directly to the hole in the palm. So you just put the finger in an upright position, feed this in a little further, and you're going to see it come right out that hole in the palm there. Pull that tight, and now we're ready to tie it off at the first tie-off bar here. Now this is an important part because you have to get the knot in the right position, so we're going to feed it through here. It goes through fairly easily. Again, the twisting motion can help if it's sticking on something. And now we want to tie it off here. But where do you place the knot? The proper placement is going to be such that the finger can bend down easily, and yet there's enough tension that it can return to an upright position. If I was to loosen this a little bit, what you'll see is if I bend it down, it's not really going back up to the full upright position. It kind of sags down because of the weight. So that would be not in the right place. If I pull it tighter, you can see that it snaps up a little bit more readily, and yet I can pull it down with minimal force. So that's about the right position that you're looking for. So now we want to tie it so that the knot is in approximately that position. There's no real easy way of doing this other than, again, I recommend 3 knots, over, under, over, under. And if you get that in about the right position, I recommend tying 1 knot first and then testing it again. That feels about right. It should not take much force to pull it down. When these cables are stretched to their maximum point of elasticity, they will not be able to stretch any further. So if the cable is too tight, like I'll just pull this back here to show you, if the cable is too tight, there'll come a point where it won't go any further. You won't be able to pull the finger all the way down. So it should be able to go all the way in, and yet it should spring back to the full upright position. That looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and tie a second and a third knot. Time over, under. Under, over. Okay, got a triple knot there, so I can go ahead and trim this off very close to the knot. I'm going to use a spot of super glue on that knot just to avoid that knot coming loose. And I'll do the same thing on the knot at this end. Just put a drop in there. Okay, and that first finger now moves exactly the way it should. We now have to repeat that process for the other 3 fingers and the thumb, doing exactly the same way. The second finger is going to tie off to the exact same post, and the next 2 fingers tie off to that post, and the thumb will tie off to the 3rd post. Okay, moving on to the next finger. Again, we're going to put this through from the back, and then turn it, spin it to get it to pop through, and then tie it off with a triple knot. 1, 2, 3. Tie it nice and tight. Clip off the end of the knot. feed it through from the outer end now, all the way through. And this time I'm going to go ahead and feed it right on through the proximal phalange and right on through to the palm. Let's see, so if you align it right, you can get it to feed all the way through in one shot. And then when I pull this tight, again, that knot there is going to flip around. Might have to give it a little nudge. You want that to snap into place so that it's underneath the tie-off bar. And now we are ready to feed it through this end. You want to figure out about where you want that knot, so I'll just hold it here. It feels a little too tight, so loosen it up a bit. It's just trial and error. You want it to be pretty much the same, as close as you can get them in terms of the amount of resistance. That feels pretty good there. So I'm going to tie a single knot to start with. Try to get it in that same position. I'll test that again. That's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and tie my other two knots. Now, for those of you that have larger fingers, needle nose pliers can be helpful in tying the knots. You can actually just grab the cord with the tip of the needle nose and use that to feed under the other part and feed through. That can make it a lot easier to tie these if you have larger fingers. Triple knot there. Clip that. And just a dab of super glue on there. Okay, now we have our first two fingers. They're both returning to their upright position nicely. We're ready to move on to the next two, and we'll do those the same way. Feels a little loose. I'm going to tighten it. The nice thing about starting with a single knot here is that you can still adjust it easily just by sort of sliding it. go ahead and do the rest of the fingers before doing the super glue. I'll do those all at once. This is the tricky part. Again, the key is to feed it in here and then to turn it until it sort of pops out the other side. It's that rotation that will get it to pop up. That's the trick. using the needle nose pliers here to help me with the knot tying, because this thumb channel is pretty shallow and doesn't give you a lot of room to work in. And there's the third knot. And we'll just put some super glue on here. Should hold those nicely in place. So now, all of these fingers, if you hold the hand up in an outright position like this, you should have all the fingers able to return to their upright position. And so that's ready to go. Now we flip it over and we're going to run the non-flexible cords on the undersides of the fingers. First thing we'll do is, again, just burn the ends real quick to make sure we don't have any frayed ends. Of course, you always want to be very careful, especially if there are kids involved here. Some adult supervision would be a good thing here. Alright, so I'm going to start from the thumb, and it works very similarly to the black cords that we did on the other side. You've got the tie off on the underside of the fingers, except we've got more space to work with here on the lower portion, so it's going to be easier to just feed this through from the top, and then we can grab it when it comes out the other side. Again, the twisting is still helpful if you're having any trouble grabbing it. And we're going to want to tie this into a triple knot, alternating over, under, over, under. And you want to be sure to pull this nice and tight. This isn't going to be a nice sort of self-locking knot like it is with a flexible cord. You want to get a real good tight pull, and I like to use a pair of needle nose pliers to help with that. It's a little hard to hold that short end. Okay, that's a nice tight knot. And go ahead and trim off the excess. And that knot, just tuck it in there so that it's out of the way. And now we're going to proceed feeding the other end through the proximal phalange. And then right behind that is a hole that goes into the palm. I'm hoping I can just kind of route it right in there. If you're lucky, you can get it in one straight shot. Not always. It can be a little tricky to run these cords. Depends on how smooth that inner channel is. I don't think we're getting all the way through, so I'm going to do this one in segments. Well, actually, I can see it looks like I have a little bit of material inside the channel there, so I'm going to use a little tool, or you can use a straightened out paper clip, something to sort of poke that free. Can't quite reach it with that. I'm just going to use a paper clip here, straighten it out. And that makes a nice tool for poking those holes clean. There you go. Looks pretty clear now. Make sure the end of my cord is clean. Now that comes right out the other side. Now, in this case, we're going to go ahead and run it through the corresponding channel on the back of the hand. but then we're just going to leave it. We're not going to tie the rear end of it yet. That's the last step that we'll do when we tie it off to the tensioner pins. For now, we're going to run the rest of these lines. So I'll just go through and do the same thing for the 4 fingers. Okay, now we have all 5 of the non-flexible cords run. If we just pull those, you can see that that activates the gripping motion that we're looking for. So you can start to see the basic mechanism in action. And from there, we're going to move on to attaching the rest of the gauntlet parts, the tensioner pins and the dovetail plug that goes on the end. And then we'll adjust all the tensioning just right. Now we just have to get the tensioners in place. Now the proper positioning is an important factor here. If you look at the way I'm holding this right now, it's straight across. The gauntlet and the line of the palm is straight across. We do not want to tie up the tensioners that way. We want this to be at an incline of, I would say, maybe 15 to 20 degrees, so that we are starting off in what's known as resting hand position. So that if you were to sort of just rest your arm very casually, you would see that your hand in a very comfortable position is somewhat inclined when you just sort of leave it in a resting position. And we want to sort of mimic that position with this hand by allowing it a little bit of an incline for the starting position. So it's going to start from here, and then when the person bends down, it will cause the fingers to grasp. So we're going to position it about where we want it. I find the best way to do that is to lay the gauntlet flat and then allow the hand to come up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take these non-flexible cords and just lay them across here. So right there is about where we want our knots to be for our tensioner pins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab myself a little Sharpie, and I'm just going to mark these right across there to give myself a little visual indicator of about where I want those knots to be. Okay? And as you can see, it's not an exact thing. I made those sort of wide marks. But that gives me at least a place to shoot for. These little tensioners are adjustable, so once we tie that knot, we're going to be able to move them in or out to some extent, but you have to get it into the right ballpark. Now that we have those knots in place, we're going to go ahead and one at a time start to feed these through the small holes at one end of these tensioner pins. And we're going to tie off a knot right about where that black mark is. And I'm going to give it a second knot, but leave that one loose so that we can adjust this if needed. Stick that one into the first slot there. And just as a test, we should be able to hold that in position. I can see that at this resting hand position, that line should be snug. It should not be, there should not be too much extra line there. It should be snug at the proper resting position when the pin is in a sort of a middle position. Not all the way in, not all the way out, but sort of a middle position. I could actually move this a little, I could go a little bit tighter on this. It's easily adjustable. That's why we leave the knots loose at first. Okay, that looks about right. I'm going to go ahead and tie the others off similarly with a couple of loose knots so that we can still adjust them. Okay, those seem about right. So now what we're going to do is insert these into their respective slots and secure them in place with our tensioner screws here. And then we can check our tensioning. Now for now I want to put these in just as far as needed to hold them in place, and then we'll adjust them once they're all in. So what you want to do is put the screw pretty much all the way in, and then you'll feel it when it catches into that pin, and you'll see it starts to pull it inwards then, and we'll just pull it about halfway in. So this is actually pretty close. We want that pinky to come in just a little bit before the other fingers. I'd say I want this finger, the middle finger, to come in a little bit sooner, so I'm going to tighten up that middle one just a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. You can see you want that thumb to come in pretty much to the same point as these first two fingers, just like it is. I might loosen that just a little bit, the thumb, so it doesn't come in quite so quickly. And that's pretty good right there. I'm going to finalize these knots at this point, tie them tighter, and tie off a third knot, and then we'll put a dab of glue on there as well. The last piece that we have is this little plug that goes at the end of the gauntlet, and it just slides right in here to the dovetail joint and fits in place there. You can secure that with a little glue, or you can use something heated to melt the little plastic along the seam there. I'm just going to go ahead and use the glue this time since that's what I have handy. And I'll just put a little bit into each of those two holes, and then a little bit along the edge. And that should be fine to hold it in place nicely there. Now, you can flip it upside down. I'll just show you the motion first. That looks pretty good. Okay, now all we have to do is put in our Velcro and our medical foam padding. We're going to start with the foam padding. There's two pieces that go in. There's one larger piece that will go back here into the gauntlet area, basically covering this area up to where the Velcro slots are. And then just a small piece to go in the front of the palm area here to protect the hand from hitting that front part of the plastic. The rest of this will be protected by Velcro, so we just need to put a little bit of padding up in the front there. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is just cut a little piece of foam to go right over here on the inner part of the palm. So you could measure and trace that. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it for this one. Don't need a very big piece here. Take off the adhesive backing. And that's going to go right on the inside here, in front of the hand. That'll just give you a little bit of padding at the front. The next piece is going to go down here, so I'm just going to take a rough measurement visually, mark that for myself. You want it to go from one Velcro slot to the other, from one side to the other. So I'm going to cut it about there. That's about right. So now I want to trim the edges so that it sort of matches the shape of the opening. So I'll cut these to be curved. And see where that lines up. Perfect. You want that to just fit in there just like that. So I will now take off the adhesive backing. And we'll just place that in there. Okay, so now we have the padding in there. Now we can move on to the Velcro. Now for the palm, we're going to need two pieces. The first one, I'd say about 8 to 10 inches long, usually. I'm going to just cut mine a little long, and then we'll trim it. And then the other piece is going to be a little bit shorter, I'd say probably about 6 inches, maybe even a little less, and we'll cut that in a moment. This Velcro is going to go with the soft side toward the skin, of course, that's very important. It's going to go in here in the palm so that it goes across horizontally like this. And if you notice inside the hand, notice the positioning of those holes. There's 3 holes in here. Those are the mounting holes for the Velcro. And so you'll need to position the Velcro such that it's centered front to the back of the hand based on where those holes are. So it's going to be positioned about like this across the hand, except of course on the inside there. So what we need to do is we need to put holes into the Velcro that align with those holes in the hand. Okay, so now before we actually install the Velcro, you might want to do some final sanding on this piece because there is going to be a little bit that's sticking out past the Velcro unless you trim it just right. What we want to do is put that Velcro in here in about the position that it's going to be, and then hold it in position there while we flip it over. And I'm just going to use a pointy tool. You could use a sewing needle or something like that to punch through, being very careful not to poke yourself on the underside, and to poke a hole through the Velcro in each of these positions so that we can then see where the screws need to go. A little tricky to hold it without moving it while you do this, but it's the best way I've found. Okay, so now we have, it's hard to see on camera I'm sure, but we have 3 holes there. I can poke them out a little bit better now just so I can see them easier. Alright, so we're just going to open these holes up a little bit using this tool here. You don't want to make these holes too big because then the screws are going to slide through. We want them big enough that we can get the screws in. A little trial and error. Okay, now what we want to do is position that, get one of our screws and put it through from the soft side. See if it fits. Yep, you can just get that through. In fact, these are fitting snugly enough that I think I can go ahead and put all 3 of them in because they're not going to slide out. Okay, and now we will screw those into place in the holes that are provided. Okay, now as you can see, those screws are nicely sunk, they're countersunk into the holes there. And so now we can cut another piece of Velcro that's going to cover up the backs of those screws. This one only needs to be probably 5 or 6 inches long. Again, I'll cut it a little longer just so it's easier to take some off and to add some on. So this you want to position again so that the soft side is face up, and position it right on the bottom there to cover those screws and to cover the very back part of the palm. Okay, and then these are going to close. And then this piece closes over that. And we can trim off the excess here. Actually, I can probably trim a little bit more off there. And that is how you make the Velcro glove that goes inside there. Now, we're going to cut another piece of Velcro for the slots. And this piece can be a little longer, I'd say maybe on the range of 10 to 12 inches. We'll trim it to the proper length afterwards. And this one is going to go in through the top slot, again with the soft side facing towards the skin. Feed it right on through to the other side. And then we're going to feed it back in through the other slot. And in this case we have plenty of excess that we're going to trim off. So I'm going to cut it right about there. And it just needs to be enough to close around the arm, so I'll trim it just about there. And there you have it. This is fully assembled. We just have one finishing touch to put on, which is optional. We like to use these gel fingertips. These are from Lee Tippy. They're called gel tips, or gel grips, I believe. And we like to put these onto the fingers because they make the grip much better than the plastic itself, which is not as grippy. We use size 3 of these, extra small, because that way they fit on nice and snug. You can just stretch them over each finger here. If you'd like, you can use some glue, some rubber cement to attach those, but they stay on pretty well without. It really depends on the level of use. Okay, here we have the fully assembled Raptor hand by e-NABLE with Velcro, foam padding, the gel grips, everything, and as you can see it's got really nice movement and really nice grip. And this is a left-hand design, so as you can see this would go over the person's arm. Their palm would fit into this, which of course I can't show you given that I'm too large and I have fingers. But their palm would be strapped into this enclosure here, nice and snug fit. Wrap that around their palm, close that down over, and then as soon as they push their wrist down, bend the wrist down, that will cause the hand to rest. And you get a very nice motion there. That's the assembly process. I hope that was helpful. Good luck to all of you in your assemblies. Hope you enjoy.